Yeah, it's a difficult one, especially as a young person, because people kind of inherently don't take you that seriously.
Mm.
And so, I've in the past spent like the first 40 minutes of a meeting getting from a situation where the person I'm meeting with thinks that realistically they're just going to sort of tell me how it is. Because if I come to them with a complaint, very often that they won't have been realistically prepared to like debate it with me. They're more interested in telling me why they've been doing it or why they've been doing it for the last 25 years. And I shut up. And so getting from there to I'm giving some valid, well-researched and legitimate sort of critique can take a minute. But I do, suggest that any young people who are legitimately trying to go and get a bit of social change going, there is plenty of reason to be sort of dejected and despondent in a lot of systems. But if you want an agency of social change, be it, because no one else, no other structure is necessarily going to be able to do that for you.
Hello and welcome back to the House Hack podcast. On today's episode, we're joined by Nathan Kelly, who is the former leader of Harrow Youth Parliament and now Public Relations Manager to the UK's Chief Youth Officer, Jack Parsons. He's a 21-year-old politics, international relations 2020 graduate from LSE with a passion for improving the arts for young people and creating positive change in society. How are you doing, Nathan?
I'm doing all right, how are you?
Yeah, no, I'm doing really well, thank you. You can, of course, find Nathan on LinkedIn, but I want to take this back a step. What does the role of a public relations manager mean, and what do you actually do within it?
That's quite funny, because one of the big things in public relations is trying to control the message. And my God, the message about public relations is that it's boring. And that makes describing what a public relations manager does like one of the greatest public relations tasks that I think I've ever given. But the long and short of my job is to control and shape the message of the company. And to use a sort of filmmaking metaphor, they often say that a story is told 3 times: when it's written, when it's performed, and when it's edited. And I like to think of sort of public relations as very much that last part, that if something is planned, it is done, and then what are you shaping it? How is it going to be? What message you're delivering? And the manner and style in which you go to do that, I think, is incredibly broad, but I think that's what public relations is.
Nice. That's a really useful way of seeing it from the context of how it fits into communications more broadly, but also into the marketing as well. It's almost that way of framing what's already been created in a way that you can actually spin it and create it into something that's useful and represents those that you are standing for as well. So with that background, I guess, in the Harrow Youth Parliament, that's a pretty interesting one. I think you got involved with it quite a young age as well. Like, how did that first come about? Like, what were the steps to getting involved, and what was the ambition for doing so?
Yeah, Harrow Youth Parliament was something I got involved in, I think, about 16. I'd been like doing debating here and there when I was in high school, because I was trying to sort of broaden what I could do when it came to sort of speaking and involvement, and sort of trying to get involved in different sort of social activities, because that wasn't a big thing for me when I was in high school. And because I'd done the debating, the same person who was in charge of that was sort of given the responsibility for the youth parliament when they contacted my high school. And so it was just sort of presented to me as like, you'll do this, right? It seems like a you thing. So I thought, yeah, it sounds fun, stand for election. That will be, a bit of an exercise. And then I won, more or less. So that's how I got involved, kind of by accident. And it was only really after I walked through the doors that I got a really clear idea of what it was going to be. And even then, I think by the time that I was leader, I had a sort of my own idea of what I wanted to do with that opportunity.
Awesome. So it's almost kind of came to you a little bit, but you almost took hold of it and grasped onto the opportunity and made the most of it. Do you think that background or that experience with social change, with politics there, really shaped the path into university for one, but also then into the youth group where you now work upon graduating? Do you think that the 3 of them are linked by that idea for social change, or do you think there's some other element there instead?
Yeah, in a big way. I think that's probably been a pretty driving factor since I was maybe 13. I remember when I was trying to become a bit more active in school, I would go around to the various toilets, and if there was a broken sort of hand towel dispenser or something, I would take it to the heads of year office and just leave it on my head of year's desk and then leave. And that was my way of trying to say, this is fixed, please deal, this needs fixing, please deal with it. And that grew, as I grew older and wiser, that sort of grew into, okay, how can I make like actionable, tangible social change? And like the best way I knew how to do that when I was 16 was like to join this youth parliament and see what I could make out of that.
Yeah, it's that kind of theme of understanding who has the power to change things as well, or who has the decision to then just go, hey, I know this is something that you can fix. Here you go, kind of smash it on the desk kind of thing. Super interesting. And on the youth parliament perspective as well, maybe just take a second and help us understand what that is and maybe what the role that youth parliament plays. Kind of what is it as an organization?
Yeah, I mean, youth parliament does kind of sound like one of these things that is, like a school council or model UN or something, where it's for young people to get involved, but no one's expected necessarily to make tangible change. And I thought, what the hell with that? So I thought, okay, what do I have structurally here? I've got a voice, I've got a platform, I've got about 40 other young people. Let's see if we can actually get something done. And so, what we have been doing, and what I think a lot of youth parliaments and youth councils do, is they'll have sort of the occasional meeting with like someone sort of in local government, or they'll hold events or do various things that offer sort of their opinion as young people. And that's often seen as an opportunity for, adults in the government or sort of local area to feedback what they're doing and get a bit of a dialogue going. And I thought, well, that's nice, but let's go for some social change. So I started booking in as many meetings with as many local government and regional government officials in my local area as I could during the year that I was leader. And, some of them took to it very well. Some of them were really happy to hear, the input of young people. Others were less pleased that they were expecting to sort of have a fairly sedate meeting with a teenager, and there was me with a document in front of them criticizing their budget. So it was a very interesting and a very rewarding experience. But I think it did give me this idea that actually, for social change, all you really need to do is be in the room. And once you've got past that threshold, your capacity to change something isn't based on your title or, the sort of authority you think you have. It's based on the ideas you have in the moment. And that was my mission: get into as many rooms and offer as much opinion about what was going on in my local area as I could.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that. So would you say, in terms of tip or advice to young people trying to find their own way through social change in different organizations within school, within university, kind of try and find your room, and then once you're in there, voice your opinion, I guess is the message?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, especially as a young person, because people kind of inherently don't take you that seriously. And so, I've in the past spent like the first 40 minutes of a meeting getting from a situation where the person I'm meeting with thinks that realistically they're just going to sort of tell me how it is. Because if I come to them with a complaint, very often that they won't have been realistically prepared to like debate it with me. They're more interested in telling me why they've been doing it the way they've been doing it for the last 25 years, and I shut up. And so getting from there to I'm giving some valid, well-researched and legitimate sort of critique can take a minute. But I do, suggest that any young people who are legitimately trying to go and get a bit of social change going, there is plenty of reason to be sort of dejected and despondent in a lot of systems. But if you want an agency of social change, be it. Because no one else, no other structure is necessarily going to be able to do that for you. Certainly a school council, or youth parliament. If you want to make that change, join those organizations. Never mind, the fact they haven't done anything for the last 5 years. Never mind the fact people think they're a bit of a joke. Doesn't matter. Take the platform and then do something with it, because you have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, I love that really kind of activated message. And I remember even back in my own school days being on the charity kind of board, and we would choose the charities that the school would support that year, kind of go about running the charity week that we did every year. And that was exactly my own thoughts of, I want to do this, but it's not really done as well as it could have as a structure over the past years. But then, yeah, there's something really mobilizing and empowering about that, to think actually, instead of standing from the sidelines or kind of making a comment or passing judgment, kind of do it yourself and try and take that responsibility in their own way if you can, because you're not just taking responsibility for yourself, you're taking responsibility for other people as well, particularly if they haven't got a voice at that table at that point in time. So you end up representing yourself, but representing other people as well. So I want to ask you, what part around the social change and working with young people that you do now, like what is that drives you the most? Is it that kind of representation factor? What is it that stands out for you?
I mean, there is a big factor about representation, but there's, something that I've been driven by for a while now is that I have autism. And that isn't something that like we've mentioned so far in this interview. It's not something that I like necessarily bring front and forward and center immediately, because people have preconceptions. People have an idea of what that means, and I like people to form something of an a judgment on what I've said before filtering it through a lens of something they feel they understand. But that is also what drives a lot of the things that I'm trying to do and a lot of the social change that I'm trying to achieve, because I'm trying to break people's preconceptions and assumptions about what someone with autism is capable of. I'm a public relations person who's just been going through about 5 years of trying to achieve social change by going into different organizations, doing a lot of speaking, communicating, which is not what people expect of people with autism. And so something that I've been trying to do consistently, whether I've been like the leader of a youth parliament or the head of a debating team, or, the head of a public relations team, whatever it has been, to go, actually, park your preconceptions for a minute, because this is what I can do. And I hope that by at least demonstrating that myself, that is enough to cause people to reevaluate the way they think.
Yeah, I think it truly is, to be honest, even from this experience of listening to you right now. It's, again, even if you hadn't told us, it wouldn't be something we'd have assumed there afterwards of like, this guy's autism. You can't hear it, even though you think you might be able to. So I think that's a really interesting way of shaping the conversation, the narrative, shaping the message, dare we say, through being that person yourself who's doing it. So I think that's a really, really great strategy as well. With autism sort of in the workplace, in university, but throughout your journey so far, kind of two questions here. The first one, like, how do you think it's shaped that journey? Has it led you down a certain path because of it? And do you think you would be where you are today without it? And then on the second point, do you think that having autism enabled you to see problems or solutions in new ways and enabled you to almost bring a different approach to your role that you think is different from many others?
That's a broad question. I mean, it's an interesting one, because that there has been a lot of doubt. I have wondered, like, am I going insane? Like, I've got like a social communication impediment. Here's me trying to go into the communication industry. But something that like I find consistently is that, because I went to like a university career session and I said that I wanted to do this, and what my various misgivings were and my strengths and weaknesses. And there was a dramatic sideways look of like, and you want to go into communication in an industry, which almost like seemed like a very gentle way of being like, maybe reconsider. And what I've been trying to sort of re-represent for people is like, yeah, I have autism. I don't have mild autism. I have autism. That's what it is. It's a much broader and more complicated condition than most people think, but that's what I've got. And in fact, it is quite a normal response for me to say I've got autism. And people go, oh, I wouldn't have known. And it's like, what have? This is what it looks like. You're looking at it. And, changing people's idea of that is very big. But to be able to say that and also say, yeah, I'm autistic. I'm also really very good at communications. They're not mutually exclusive things. I'm not doing communications in spite of being autistic. I'm doing communications and I'm autistic, and they do inform each other. But, to the end of how they, how they interact and what changes, I don't know, because I've never not been autistic. So I can't give a very informed view on like how autism impacts my sort of journey through public relations and communications, because I've never really seen it done a different way. I can look at how other people do it and I can observe, and I do a good amount of that. But, the way that I do it is just sort of the way that I feel it needs to be done. And whether that's informed by autism, I imagine it probably is, because everything I do is. because you can't divide autism from me as a person. They're very interconnected. They're pretty much one thing. And so it is, you know, it's my life experience, and I think anybody's life experience informs what they do.
Yeah, and that's very true. You can't know what you don't know, and here you can't separate what's part of you, especially in your mind, from making decisions and making informed, calculated risks. Like, you can't separate the two and know what is due to something and what isn't. So I think that's a very fair answer, to be honest. And I think it all comes down to probably the key word of perspective. Like, we're all living life through our own lens, and we're all seeing it through our own parts of our brains that have been conditioned certain ways. You might not have a condition or a certain like mental struggle in certain ways labeled, but each of us have had experience in the past that define how we see the world now as well. So I guess it's quite different for everyone, but very interesting to hear your thoughts on that as well. And I guess this might answer my question in a different way. Like, why did you choose public relations to start your career in? Is there something, one element of it that drew you to it? Is it that link between the youth parliament, debating, representation, messaging? Like, was there one reason, one day or one moment that stood out on defining that choice? Or was it more a kind of accumulation of knowledge and a sort of decision you made over a longer period of time?
I'm going to answer that in a second because my dog is asking to go out. So I was trying to hold the frame so I could answer it. Right. Seamless. Okay. Trying to remember the thrust of your question. Oh yeah, why did I choose public relations? Yeah, absolutely. I do think that there's, you know, no, that's not even how you start. Sorry, I was just thrown from what you're trying to get to. You asked why did I go into public relations? You know, how did the social change work?
Yeah. So how did you get into public relations, and did you choose it instantly, or did you choose over a time period, like a longer period of time?
Yeah, I think I fell into public relations kind of by accident, in as far as I looked. Molly, you're ruining my doing my thing. Come here. Come here. Come here. Yes. I'm having a baby. Okay, fourth time's the charm. Yeah, I think I came into public relations very much by accident, because it was a very methodical process of going, okay, so I've done GCSE, I've done A-level, I've done the degree. What on earth am I going to do with my life? And because, you know, I think there was a very big expectations with sort of my friends and sort of family and whatever, that I'd go into politics. And what was dawning on me the more and more I was involved in politics is that I did not enjoy it. It's, you know, it's kind of built on this sort of duplicitous approach to interaction, and that's kind of endemic to how it works, because in a system where you are kind of relying on people's votes or whatever, there's never really an honest conversation to be had. You'll never really see, you know, prime minister's questions where the prime minister will criticize the opposition and the opposition leader will go, no, yeah, fair point, no, yeah, we did actually do quite a bad job of that one, yeah. And you'll never see the prime minister go, oh no, actually, yeah, fair criticism, yeah, we did completely mess that bit up. And so you've got two sides that will never really give any ground on anything. And that's not a conversation, that's just bitter. And I think that's why it switches so many people off, including myself. And so I looked through the skills that I had and what I wanted to do with my life. And it sort of ended up being the last one on the list. Like, after I filtered everything else out, I don't want to do that, and I'm not good at this, there was their public relations officer. And I thought, public relations, like it sounded to me, because I'd heard it repeatedly as a sort of almost a cliched sort of dull white collar job, and yet it kept coming up every time I looked through it. Every time I tried to narrow down what I might do, that's what it ended up being. So it was a case of going, okay, so I want to go into communications. That does seem to be where my skill sets and my interests align, but what's my goal there? And my goal is to lead the communications efforts in life-changing campaigns. That's what I want to do, because my passion is still, and has for a while been, in social change. But I know the way I can apply my skill set to that is by running communications. And I don't know if I'll have the opportunity to, you know, run communications on a campaign, you know, that is potentially running internationally. And to be able to do that, especially as an autistic person, to show, not to show the autistics, hey, you can be in public relations too, because that's not a message anyone wants to hear. No one is out there marketing public relations. It's just not that attractive a proposition for a lot of people. But to be able to represent something that people don't tend to expect. No one really perceives somebody with autism to be, charismatic or attractive, or the next prime minister, or someone in that sort of a position. And I think actually, if I can change that, if I can just change people's perception of that, then I'll have done a decent job.
Yeah, no, powerful, well said again. And I think the thing that I take away from what you said is that it kind of kept coming up, and it was kind of a recurring thing that almost kept dropping in to your feeds, your lab, your opportunities to then think, oh, actually, I will take that on. And I wonder what your thoughts are within the classic follow your passion versus maybe follow your skill set type conversation that is the cliche around all of these chats, right? Because as you mentioned, there was that maybe pressure or thought of, okay, it's politics for me. And I know that you're not alone in that. I think we all have our own pressures at that age of, okay, you need to be doing that, please, off you go from wherever. So yeah, what are your thoughts in terms of following passion versus following skills?
Passion versus skills is a really difficult one, because it is very possible to be very passionate and very interested in something with which you have no skill. I'm really interested in architecture, love it, find it fascinating, got a bunch of books on it, flyers, leaflets. I'm just really not good at maths. Like, that was an absolute non-starter career from the go, because I don't have the skills for it. That's just not me. And so it kind of got parked. It didn't stop it from being a passion. You don't have to necessarily make a career and a living out of, something that you love, because you've got the rest of your life. And that's still something that you can apply and do. But I do feel, honestly, that I was in a fairly fortunate position, that the way our academic system is set up almost like funnels you in, do GCSE, then do A levels, then do a degree, then get a job. And I happen to be good at those things. I was good at one particular type of exam. I can write essays. I can write quite good essays. So I did A levels. I did 4 essay-based A level subjects at exactly the same time that the government was kind of advising, do a language, do a this, do a humanity, do everything. And I went, no, I'm doing the 4 things that I'm really good at. And I was fortunate enough to do 4 things that fit my skill set, but were also in areas that I was interested in. So I could do politics and sociology and English literature and history and things that I liked. And that's fortunate. And I'm quite lucky, I think, that I'm not in a position where I so happen to be good at something that I had no passion for. But I think it's worth remembering that, if you can find a way to make money from your passion, whatever that is, if you can make a living out of it, do. If that job doesn't exist yet, invent it. There is so much more capacity to achieve change, not just in the world, but in your life. Don't just, you don't just have to follow the structures that are set up in front of you. I mean, if I'd listened to the number of people that had either, gently suggested or outright told me that communications and autism do not go together, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't be doing this with my life. So, do follow your instincts. Do that. But, I'm not unaware of the fact that you can end up following your passions rather than your skills. And, potentially those things just don't go together. I do try to be a realist about these things. It's very, very easy, especially when you've had a level of success in what you're doing, to go, yeah, go for it, follow your dreams. And actually, you can fail. But the thing to remember is you can fail your GCSEs, then your A levels, then your degree. You can, hop through minimum wage jobs through your 20s and then crack it when you're 35. You can make success pretty much any time. Failing an exam, failing anything, not being successful at something you're trying at the moment, especially in your sort of late teens, early 20s, doesn't just guarantee. In fact, it's the complete opposite. It basically has no bearing on what's going to happen with the rest of your life. You can take your passions and you can take your skills at any age, at any time, at any life stage, and make something out of it.
Yeah, I think it's about patience as well, in that, I mean, social media almost certainly plays a part, a kind of collective existence online, but we kind of want everything immediately, like just mentioning there, in terms of you can achieve your dream, your success, your job, whatever that thing is that it is for you at 35. Like, well, I'm 22, that's feels zonks away, right? But actually having that patience, that perspective, as Charlie said earlier, of you don't have to have it immediately, you don't have to know what it is right now. And I think that's part of the conversation too, of that pressure to know as a young person, because that's the question we're always asked by our elders or our peers in the workplace. And to be honest, I don't think they know why they're asking it half the time either. I think they're just conditioned to do it. And they go, oh, you know, you're a young person, you're just coming up in the world, whatever. What do you want to do with your life? It's like a sort of social bit of chit chat, right? But actually the impact of that statement then flips back on part of a young person to go, huh, I don't know the actual answer to that. I don't have a you know, what they expect me to say in that situation. So I'm going to kind of make something up in that sense, because the answer that they do have is, I don't know, I'm trying a few things out and I'll see how I go. That's most often how it goes. But then the flip side of it becomes, because they don't want to say that, you know, I really want to do this thing, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do that, and like planning out the next 5, 10, 15 years. And it can be quite damaging to do that, to kind of plan ahead that far sometimes, and yeah, not take things in the moment. I don't know how that reflects on your own experience of trying to plan ahead, and kind of the work that youth group do as well.
Yeah, I mean, that sets me up perfectly, I think, because I've never really planned that far ahead, which, you know, is something that I don't think you're necessarily encouraged to do by society, by the school system, by anything. That there is kind of an expectation that you have a bit of a life plan going, and you kind of have your career plan sorted by the time you're 19, which is kind of insane, especially if you consider that you need to, you know, whether you're sort of following A-levels route or BTEC's route or whatever, the idea you start sort of selecting options when you're all of 15 that's meant to dictate what you do with the rest of your life doesn't really make any sense. You know, that by the fact you finish your degree, you're meant to have sort of locked in the direction you're going with your life, especially when a lot of the time, you know, you apply for a place and say you have a degree. It's like, in what? Doesn't matter. And it's like, well, why did I do it then?
Yeah.
What was that for? And does that make such a difference? So I've never planned too far ahead. I've done what I'm doing in that given year and gone, well, I'm enjoying this, I'm going to carry on doing this bit and get rid of that. And that's, with a lot of luck, what I was able to do through school is I picked, you know, a lot of my GCSEs just sort of because I enjoyed the course the year before, because they were kind of fun. And there were a lot of conversations about, oh, you're doing geography and history, they're both humanities, that's a waste of an option. I like geography and history. Like it was
I
a
had that
system
exact
that
same
worked.
thing, yeah.
And it was this idea that you were meant to sort of follow a certain structure that I more or less completely ignored. You know, I ignored the advice that you were given, you know, for SATs tests in year 6, and as a result I failed most of them, and I didn't care. And I went into high school, and you know, I learned and I did things, and you know, I got better at subjects and got rid of others, and I eventually finished college with the highest results in my year. And that was through trusting myself, not by paying too much attention to whatever sort of structures were put on you, or thinking about expectations of where I needed to be in 10 years. I did what I enjoyed and what I was good at in that moment. And I'm still doing that. If public relations, you know, gets boring, if that's not interesting for me in a year, I'm not going to sit there and think, oh God, what a waste of the last few years, because I had to go through this to get there. Whatever is in my future, whether I'm, you know, going to end up leading international communications campaigns, which is what I want to do right now, or whether I end up, you know, running a fish and chip shop, I'll do what I enjoy doing. I think you can only make, you know, the best decisions with the information you have at the time. But, you know, I wouldn't be too worried about building a grand life plan. I don't expect to have the same ideas about my future when I'm 30 as I do now. I don't expect that at all. In fact, I imagine when I look back on now, when I'm 30, I think I was a bit of an idiot for various reasons, because that's what you do. You look back at, you know, I look back at Facebook posts when I was 15 and go, oh God, I think I was doing that for. But that's all right, because that was the best I could do then. And that's all I'm ever really trying to do, you know, make the most out of what you can do right now.
Yeah, and that's a really good message. I think within that, there's always the classic word that if you say, anyone will agree with you on it, anytime, any place, of balance, because there's a part of me that says, you know, you will need to plan out where you're going, because that can shape what you do with the day to day, but also you need to be flexible to change. So I think part of working with a startup, working with your own thing, it means that I've got in front of me a list of 1, 3, 5, 10-year goals. So like, again, life planning a little bit, but I also know that within that, I'm going to review it in a year's time and be like, if they change, it's fine. So I think that's the key thing, is that it's about shaping the direction, the present, to a future you want, but also knowing that it's okay if you don't actually go that path, and you can change it and alter it down the line as well. Because for me personally, I think for quite a few others as well, it does help having that structure, that goal to aim for, even if it might not become the one you want in the end, because you're always then moving and always progressing towards it as well, which I think is really, really interesting. Then within that kind of mindset of a startup, that mindset of kind of working with really cool people doing really cool things, is there any really big takeaways you've had in the last 6 months of working with the youth group and working in that startup environment that kind of you would like to tell your graduate self, or like to tell those that are considering it as an option post-university as well?
Yes, probably. I mean, when I was, you know, when I was finishing university, I think I had a sort of an idea of what the world of work was, you know, based on sort of my previous experiences and whatever. But I never worked in like a proper public relations environment. You know, I'd never worked sort of with a team of people sort of that serious about getting something done. And I think the best advice that I sort of could have given to my graduate self is like, don't worry, people are still figuring this out themselves. Because my main worry was, I don't know how to do this and I don't know how to do that. And you know, I'm so sort of driven as a person by sort of learning through example, through experience. And that comes like into autism as well a lot, because like the way that I have sort of learned to, you know, communicate with people, you know, go up and speak to sort of a waiter in a restaurant has been based on watching like my mate do it, and just watch that to get a sense of how it works. Because something that, you know, often sort of gets in my way of doing things, I don't really like unpredictability, which again, I do an unpredictable job, so I'm clearly making my life difficult for myself, but sort of trying to sort of observe and learn and go, okay, so that's how that person's doing that thing. That's something I can copy. And eventually it becomes second nature. I get used to it. It just sort of becomes a pattern, and it's sort of part of life. And I think that's true for the workplace. That's true for a startup. That's true for a company. You know, people are still figuring it out. And just sort of my knowledge that, you know, I'm not going to walk in and not understand one thing, and everyone's not going to sort of look at me like I'm an idiot. That's not going to happen. I still have conversations with people that are just starting at the youth group who, you know, will not fully understand one thing, or will do one small thing wrong, and will be quite distressed about it, because they'll assume that I'm like going to be quite judgmental towards them for it because they've done one thing sort of out of step. It's like it's fine. It's not even a big deal. But you know, I think that would have made me a lot more chilled out going into the world of work, you know. But I'm also aware that I'm kind of lucky to work for a company that has that sort of workplace environment. I'm very aware that there's a lot of places that are less comfortable and are less youth friendly. And, you know, I think that is something that is definitely worth looking out for with a career, is to go, okay, here's the job I want to do. But look into, where do you want to work? And write down a list of 5 values that you don't want to compromise yourself. Because, you know, getting a job and getting an income and all of that is now more than ever incredibly difficult to try to actually nail down. But rather than going into every job interview and every situation thinking, you know, just thinking about what I can offer them with my experience, my CV, my whatever, you know, ask them, what's their workplace environment like? Ask them those questions. And I think that if you do get into a place that can give you that sort of security and that sort of comfort, I think is really, really important, especially when you're starting your career.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think it's that learning through doing and not getting stuck in that analysis paralysis of trying to plan out the future too much, and actually get started, and don't be afraid of the failure that might come with it as well. But then also, rather than seeking employers because of titles or because of outcomes, instead seek values in companies and culture of places you want to work. And I think that's a really, really solid message, and really something that resonates probably on both sides as well. So kind of bringing that to the employer question, how can the employer create an environment in which they can attract those people that are values, culture driven? Is it about through their public relations, their messaging, creating that? Or is it something that internally needs to be changed and then resonated in different ways? Like, what's the communication strategy for sharing the values and the uniqueness of a company and their culture to then attract talent who does care about it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it has a lot to do with the example I gave earlier, that, you know, there is sort of the writing and then the performing and then the editing. And similarly, when it comes to, you know, company values, you've got to decide what those values are going to be. Then you've got to practice them. You've got to actually do them. They have to genuinely exist in your company. And then you can do public relations about them. I think there is a perception around public relations that it's just sort of the spin run, that regardless of what's happening, it doesn't matter because now here's what we're going to tell you what's happening. And like in politics, there's bits of that. Certainly, you know, especially in America in recent years, there's a hell of a lot of never mind what's actually happening. Here's just the statement. And I think that in practice, most public relations isn't that. It's okay, so here's what we intended to do. Here's, you know, the objective. Here's what we're doing. And now here's how we're going to communicate it to people. Because you can do a whole lot of good, and not communicate that you're doing it, and no one benefits from it. You know, your company's reputation doesn't benefit from it, sure. But also, if you're trying to make a difference and you've got a program or an idea or an initiative or just some, you know, good advice going, and it isn't getting to people, then that is a disservice to the work that you're doing. And so I think that, you know, when it comes to creating those values, your company needs to have them. You need to set the intention, and then you need to practice it. It needs to be part of what you do as a company. It can't be a situation that I think public relations is often sort of left to, a sort of a tacked on idea that the company is sort of meant to have these values and that sort of thing that we're doing, but then here's the real work, here's the reality, here's how things actually go. No, scrap that, get rid of that. Incorporate those values into how you work as a company, you know, at every structure, every level. Make that the company, build the company around it. And then the public relations is easy. You're just talking about what's happening.
Yeah, kind of not putting too much pressure on that editing part, which you mentioned as the kind of third phase, and actually kind of being more integrated in the whole approach of actually making sure you're communicating the right things, because you can have the best communication and PR in the world, but on the flip side of that, if what you're communicating or the initiative you're sharing is no good, then there's no point in the PR in the first place. So it kind of comes full circle in that way. And so I wonder if there are any maybe tools or thoughts about empowering not just young people, but just individuals to notice or know when a company or a brand is doing something good and they're being authentic, versus that kind of greenwashing or equivalent type practice where it's maybe that negative side of PR that maybe is kind of bad practice.
Yeah, I mean, that's difficult, because if you are, you know, an oil company, for instance, then a big part of your public relations operation is probably to be, you know, how, you know, eco-friendly you are and the number of solar panels you built the previous year, never mind the amount of greenhouse gases you're pumping into the atmosphere. And that sort of PR to me is like, it's never something that I ever want to be involved in, because your whole job then is the antithesis of what I was just saying. It's ignoring what you're doing and going, here's the image we really want people to see. And that's kind of unpleasant. I mean, when you see it with an oil company or with sort of certain other companies where you'll be able to tell watching an advert or something about, you know, the company and what it's like, you think, okay, but it's not though. You know, I've got my ear to the ground. I've seen the news. This is clearly a spin operation happening, but it can be a lot harder to tell with other brands you're not necessarily as aware of. And there is kind of always that question with PR, with advertising, is, you know, is what I'm watching a genuine representation of what's happening? And I think in all cases, for, you know, really phony cover-up PR and genuine social good PR, it's all a case of, well, this is the company, this is what they're choosing to put out. This is what they want this is what they're trying to get your attention with. And that's great. But don't take that at face value. I hope people don't take my PR at face value, because if they just read what I've written about some great stuff that we're doing, then that's not enough. I want them to get involved. I want them to be part of it. I want them to see it, because that's the point of doing it. The other type of PR would like you to read it and then move on. Just accept it, just really quickly, and then never think about it again. Because when you read into it and you go past that facade, you see what's actually happening. And that's totally the opposite of what I'm trying to achieve. And I think that if you do want to look into any company, then do to try and find out, if there's an authenticity to it, or if it is, very much a cover up of one respect or the other. But I would say do that to everything, because if a company is trying to demonstrate social good, they want you to read into it. It's the same thing with any academic who's out there. They want you to read their 400-page paper. That's why they wrote it. They'd love you to. That's the whole point. Whereas the other side is they kind of like you to see the title and see the shape and never ever read into it. So read into everything, because the people and the places and the organizations that are doing good would love you to. And the people who wouldn't are going to struggle to hide what they're doing more, the more vigilant we are.
Yeah, no, well said. And I think the point again to kind of ham home is that if you do the work and you take that responsibility yourself, then you don't necessarily need to ask yourself that question on, what signs can I spot? What intuitively do I need to look out for? Because you're kind of building it into your everyday, rather than only kind of digging in when you expect to. So, the kind of standard thing on social is, well, everyone distills it down to 300 characters across a post, or whatever it is, the limitation depending on the platform. And so obviously there's a ton of stuff that's missed out. And obviously for a PR type perspective, if there's a press release that goes out, you need to catch people's attention. You've got to write a snappy headline. You've got to write it in a way that makes it easy for people to read and understand, because you want them to take an action as a result of reading it. And so understanding not just what you're receiving when you read something or hear something, but understand what the person telling you that, what their purpose is, what their agenda is, if it's in that situation, what the business wants, if it's a business. And then within that, you can kind of reverse engineer it, I suppose. And yeah, I think that's the really powerful kind of message. I think if you can do it, it's so hard though as well to kind of assume that personal power, particularly thinking about the role of technology. But I want to bring us around to the role that PR plays within organizations and workplaces. So does positive PR and PR done well, it should impact its employees kind of positively, right? And enable that workforce to continue to work towards those visions, those personal values themselves. Like, it should be that kind of integrated force for good is what I'm trying to say, rather than that kind of bolt on, as we mentioned earlier, to like the kind of, yeah, it's the last thought, when actually we're trying to say that it should be that integrated focus.
Yeah, absolutely. If your PR isn't talking to your employees, to your stakeholders, I don't know what you're doing. I mean, that should be, absolutely should be a really integral part of anyone's PR operation, because you're talking to your audience, and you're talking to, you're talking to your boss, and you're talking to your co-worker. That's the point, because you're shaping the message of the company. And if that doesn't include and involve the people who make up that company, then you're not going to do a very good job of it.
Do you think people forget, or do you think businesses forget the internal PR and focus too much on that external, kind of pushing messages outward rather than focusing internally as well?
I think that it's very possible for a business, or really anybody, to focus a lot on their external perception. And it's easily done, because that's where the money comes from. That's where the crises are going to be created or averted, and it's easy to do. But I think that if you safeguard and look after and are careful with your company and how it's built and how it works and its ethos, then that is going to have a massive effect on your external PR. If I'm working for a major retailer, and I know for a fact that the staff are all paid really well, the working conditions are really nice, there's a good amount of time off, there's a 4-day week, those sorts of things, then I'm going to be sort of sleeping quite soundly, because the likelihood of there being some sort of PR crisis, or the idea I'm going to be given some sort of work to try to counteract something negative about the company, isn't going to be a factor. And so the better embedded your good values are in your company, the easier it is for your PR to just be like what you're doing. Because there's a lot of if you're a stapler company, then social good probably isn't going to be the central focus of public relations. It's going to be selling staplers. But nevertheless, if you can just focus on your message, on what you're doing, that's great. So I would, with all my years of experience, I would encourage PR professionals and companies and CEOs out there to put that stock into how the companies are built and put those values into how those organizations are run, because it makes an enormous difference, not just to public relations, but to the way those companies and those employees are going to feel.
Yeah, so it almost comes, like Ryan said earlier, full circle. And that when you create PR that's not just external, but actually has stakeholders buying in internally, you almost create a message that you have to live up to. Like, oh, we're doing some great work out there. We're doing X, Y, and Z. This person's doing that. This person's doing this. Okay, that looks awesome. Like, you guys look like a cool, great brand and place to work at. And then it's always on the employees to be like, yeah, we are. We have to live up to that now. We have to set the expectations, the bar high. So you have to kind of always go above and beyond with it as well. I think that's probably a really interesting point of PR coming into like your experience with autism for one, but also with other individuals who are breaking down those misconceptions about the labels they're given and the kind of backgrounds and groups they have. Do you think there's any kind of takeaways that they can be given from PR of how to manage, perhaps for one, their like personal brand? Because there's a lot of overlaps between the two, but also the misconceptions other people might have about them as well. Is there any key takeaways from communications through which they can kind of relay a new message about themselves that's different to the public opinion at large and kind of break down those misconceptions in a new way?
Yeah, I think that on a personal level, the most important thing you can do is be authentically you. It's almost a platitude at this point, but a lot of PR strategies for especially companies that aren't the most interested in social good are going to be driven around how can we give our company a positive public perception, and that's often going to be a PR unit that is there to address and to tackle the fact that their company isn't necessarily going to be inherently viewed very positively by the public. And I think when you start to think about that on a personal level, you run into this problem of being sort of almost too concerned about what other people think of you. You can never control, and I'm sure businesses wish they could, but you can never really control what other people think of you. You can never control what opinions they have necessarily. You can't force someone to change their mind, but you can go out every day and you can be your best self. You can give across the best version of yourself. And I'm very aware that there is a lot of the presentation game going on in every appearance, from the way that you talk and behave and dress and everything is right down to how you would like to come across to other people, rather than how you are sort of necessarily in your own head. And that's fine, because everybody works that way. But when it comes to tackling misconceptions, I do sometimes think, if I've announced to somebody, yes, hello, I have autism, it's never that direct, but if that's something they're aware of, I'll often see that, like, the slight tick that goes in their head where they've just gone, oh, didn't know that, okay. And it's like everything I then say is like, okay, so now I'm either reinforcing or challenging stereotypes, rather than just going about my business. I've now got this thing to be working with as well. And there is a level of PR to that, because you're thinking, if I do something really stereotypically autistic, I'm just going to reinforce someone's idea. Like if they're talking to me and I'm confused, or if I take something accidentally overly literally, then it's kind of irritating. But at the same time, it is authentic. It is me, and that's just what's happened. And I don't think it would be I think be you is the most cliched piece of advice ever. Like, yes, be yourself. Also be aware of how you're coming across. That's something I've got a second sense for permanently, because with autism, how you're coming across to people isn't something that's necessarily intuitive. And so you've got to have a really, an almost sort of methodical eye on that. So, be aware of yourself, be aware of how you're coming across, know how you want to come across, and try to action that. But as soon as you try to be something that isn't authentically you, as soon as you try to be something that, even if it's, even if you're trying to be something you think is quite cool and quite, inauthenticity shines, whether it's a company doing it or a person. Somebody trying to be something they're not just stands out. And it's never, never, never a good idea, because even if you're trying to be nice and kind, like, if you're trying to be something you think is great, if people pick up that it's a bit phony, it'll have the complete opposite effect, because the only thing worse than somebody abjectly being unpleasant to you is somebody being nice and you can tell they're being insincere, because then not only is it unpleasant, it's dishonest.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good message. And I think that perhaps goes full circle in that really when you're thinking about yourself on a personal level, the creation piece should be as authentic as possible, but you should always consider the editing piece there afterwards about how you can communicate it in a way that people understand and can relate to. And I think there's probably a key word here that summarizes a lot of the learnings from today is empathy. Like once you put across, hey, look, this is how I am, or this is how you are, and I understand, I can listen to you, but this is my kind of situation and what I've dealt with. That is what kind of almost smoothens the process of communication, by having an understanding of each other and listening to each other. And that really helps that gap and bridges it between the two of them as well. So kind of just pretty summarizing everything we've thought about today, then Nathan, in your own mind and your own thoughts, what does the future of communications and public relations look like? What's the next sort of 5-10 years coming to? Do you think it's going to be more focused on individual communication strategies, brand strategies, or is it something else entirely different that we haven't even thought about today?
Oh God, I hope so. I mean, that's the goal, isn't it? That's the idea. The hope with anything is that, the way that you're taught it and the way that you think it's meant to happen, hopefully in 10 years, something else is there, because that's the goal. Because whether you're at school or at university, that whole structure is built around this idea of, whether it's a professor or a lecturer, they're telling you what they were taught. The whole way you succeed in school and university is you repeat back what you've been told. You had a bit of originality and a bit of flair, but the way you get full marks in an A-level is you memorize the book and you repeat it back. That's what you do. And that isn't life. That isn't progress. That's just going, I understand the way we did things. That's not doing anything new. So yeah, I really sincerely hope that in 5 or 10 years, the way we look at communications, the way we look at campaigning, the way we look at these things does change and does get better. Whether that is, and something that I'm very passionate about is being much more sustainable in the way that we do things. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday where they were saying, I don't understand at this point why coffee shops still have disposable cups that are, non-recyclable. It's insane. Just get people to bring a plastic cup. And my response is, oh yeah, but now with the pandemic, if you're ordering to yourself, if you're ordering things, then how do you get something ordered to you? And he went, are you telling me you can't live without ordering prep to your house? And I thought, actually, that's a good point. Is it something that I need, or can we adapt to it? I think that's something, it's a weird silver lining in the pandemic that, a few years ago we were saying, oh, there's absolutely no way we can get rid of jet power. And then suddenly we couldn't fly aircraft. And we're like, I guess boats are cool. We can do boats or a train, maybe a big train. Yeah, okay, that's fine then. Big, massive boat. Yeah, we can do it. Because when there's necessity, when you say, okay, we have to be sustainable or the world ends, very quickly you go, there were a few thousand years of human civilization before the Industrial Revolution. We can probably hack this. And I hope that's true for the environment. I hope it's true for communication. I hope it's true for everything. Because I love to think that the way we do things tomorrow will be informed by the things that we do today, but will always be new and always be innovative.
Yeah, almost necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? That's the classic sentence that perhaps summarizes that of you only really face invention when you have to, because the circumstances around you change. And I think this last year's perhaps been the biggest proof in the pudding of that really once you throw a massive kind of curveball at everyone, they have to either move out the way or get hit really, really hard. So you can kind of see that in these big shocks to the environment at large. And I think personally, with the communication and the PR strategies more broadly the next 5 years, it's going to be pretty interesting. I think kind of calling back to that first episode with Claudia a little while ago, there's going to be, in my opinion, a lot more of people-centered communication, and it filtering through from not just a brand message, but bringing into the opinion of the employees and those that work there to create that, not illusion, but that messaging of what they do, of the values that they have, and of the mission that they're on as well. So I think this personal branding train is just getting out the station, and it's about to get pretty hot pretty quickly. So bringing that and imagining most corporates where not just the CEO posts a tweet out saying how great they are because it's written on a kind of public relations post, but actually it's the whole company talking about it, and they're creating a conversation about what they've recently done. And that's pretty powerful. And I think that's kind of a really interesting angle and future of communications within brands as well. I don't know if Ryan's got any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what we could distill this down for as we close out. Like, basically, all of our conversation is always around employees and employers, and we distinguish young people within that as well as future employees if they're not already within work. But what are maybe the more practical things that we've spoken about that we can summarize or collide together in terms of employees and employers? So it's been a ton that we've spoken about today, but kind of what are the main takeaways for a business and for a person or an employee? Because a lot of that is kind of visionary, right? It's like we want to be part of that change within the future. And actually that's how social change is, of course. It's about trying to create action through vision. And then sometimes we then have to backtrack and go, okay, what's the action? What's the first little domino that's going to knock over the bigger domino, and that kind of domino effect to create the greater change? So thinking it in terms of that analogy of PR, communication, social change, what are the first smaller dominoes that we're starting to try and knock down at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, big questions. Definitely big questions.
That's what we're here for.
But you know, I think Charlie makes a really good point that the sort of old model of, like, you know, your CEO or your sort of brand monolithic entity sort of spouting everything has really begun to change quite dramatically in recent years, mainly because of social media, because of the internet more broadly. That, you know, when I'm giving, you know, an interview, when I'm speaking online at any point, I've got these three considerations. Of one, I'm talking to a camera lens. There's no one actually here. No one's, you know, it's not actually happening. And then the second, come here. Sorry, she was audibly like.
Yeah, no, we got it though.
Did we get it? Are we there? Yeah.
No problem.
I don't mind having another crack at that response, Molly. I don't mind having another crack at that response if it's like gonna weirdly segment the edit.
Yeah, no, please do. We can grab another, yeah, have another stab.
With the future of PR.
Yeah.
Let's see. I mean, big question. I think that the future of public relations, Charlie made a really good point that as things go on, we're not going to see quite so much of these big sort of monolithic, the CEO talking, or at least the CEO's sort of PR department, you know, just communicating through an entity. We're going to see less of that because, you know, in recent years, especially with social media and, you know, fully with the internet, there is so much more of people's personal brand available online, and we're going to see more of that. I mean, you know, whenever I'm doing sort of any piece of the camera or any of these situations, any of these video calls, there's these three considerations that go through my head. Is one, there's no one really here. I'm talking to a camera lens. I'm literally, you know, all of your faces are down here. Our eyes aren't in alignment. I'm looking at a lens, and there's a slight disconnect there. And my second thing is, okay, I know who I'm trying to talk to. I'm trying to speak to you two and the audience of your podcast. And my third thought is, this is going on the internet. Anyone could see it. And that is a really interesting thing to try to balance, to go from, I'm not actually talking to anybody right now, I'm speaking at a lens, through to anybody in the world could be listening to my words tomorrow. And trying to factor that in, that's got to, and it is, you know, especially with social media, have a real impact on how we market and how we communicate. Because, you know, you never know how your communications campaign with just you and your phone in your bedroom can have an impact if you've got the right message in the right place at the right time. And I sincerely hope that companies get, you know, get on board with that, because that's the direction things are going to go in. And I don't know if, social media is going to become like a sort of really antiquated idea in 10 or 20 years. You don't know the direction things are going to go in. But I do sincerely think the future of public relations does lie in people's personal brand, representing what they do, representing sort of who they are. Because, I'm not on here like championing necessarily, like talking about all the many things my company is doing. I'm talking about sort of me and my life. And I hope that like reflects positively and accurately on my firm. But, I'm not out here as a mouthpiece. I'm here talking about my experience. And you'll find other people at my company and so many other companies doing the same thing. And that is a direction that we're going in. I'm certain of it.
Yeah, it definitely is. Definitely is. Kind of personal experience rather than mouthpiece definitely is a great way to summarize and finish today's episode. So Nathan, thank you so much again for jumping on to the podcast. It's been a pleasure having you. People can reach out to you on LinkedIn and find the youth group there as well. So looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Ryan.